It's a study of sowing and reaping grace. That's our topical study for today, sowing and reaping grace. If we look at Galatians Chapter 6, verse 7, we'll start there just as our basic foundational verses for where we're going to be going today. We see there it says that Paul's saying to the Galatians here in Galatians 6, 7. He says, be not deceived, God is not mocked. For whatsoever a man soweth, that shall he also reap. For he that soweth to his flesh shall of the flesh reap corruption. But he that soweth to the Spirit shall of the Spirit reap life everlasting. And let us not be weary in well-doing, for in due season we shall reap if we faint not. So we see there, we're seeing these three verses we're looking at, considering the idea of sowing and reaping in the dispensation of grace. And so when we look at the concept of sowing and reaping, we see it examined in this dispensation. We understand why much of the things turn out the way that they do. And as we see that, in turn, how God operates based on this understanding, this operation, and how we're to operate as well based on this. Paul explained this to the Galatians who were being deceived into going back under the law. And that's an important part to see, especially in the book of Galatians where law is concerned. Law leads to the understanding that you're under a covenant. And so if you think that you're under a covenant or doctrine that concerns covenant, you've got Calvinism that has that, you have different religions that have it, different denominations that pour that into their understanding, where they say that, we're under grace, but we're under a grace covenant. There's no such thing as a grace covenant. You're either under a covenant or you're under grace. You're under law, you're under grace. So there's no such thing as a grace covenant. You can drive by a church and it says Church of Grace Covenant Church, or something like that. There's no such thing. So we see there that, if you go back under the law, if you're deceived into going back under the law, you'll think that you're under a covenant, and therefore, the whole point of that is that the idea of sowing grace or reaping grace won't work so well. The operation for which God has set up, you'll think you're under a covenant, and therefore you can earn blessings or earn cursings as a result of your actions or inactions or God's actions, and you would misunderstand why things turn out the way they do today. So we look in verse 7, Galatians chapter 6, verse 7. We see here it starts out saying, be not deceived, God is not mocked. This is what Paul is starting out to say to the Galatians here. And he's saying this in regards to how they operate and what's going on with them concerning their operation. He's saying, be not deceived, God is not mocked. And so we look there as he refers to this, talking about how they communicate, talking about how they operate, talking about how they work in everything that they do. And he's saying, be not deceived, God's not mocked. He's omniscient, he's omnipresent, he sees all that's being done. And he says, for whatsoever a man soweth, that shall he also reap. And that's important to see that. Because in this verse especially, he says, God is not ignorant of all that we do. If we shall reap what we sow eternally, even in inheritance, when we go to the judgment seat of Christ. If we're saved, and we'll reap what we sow in destination. If we're lost. And some examples of that, if we look at even in the red letters, they talk about this idea, and we'll get some spiritual lessons from it. It's not going to apply to us per se, but even if you look at Luke 23 in verse 35. And in Luke 23, verse 35, you see a little bit about this. I just want to look at the spiritual lesson that's given in here. This is also talking about the sowing and reaping, but it also goes with the effect of God is not mocked. We see here when Christ is on the cross, he says, and the people stood beholding, and the rulers also with them derided him, saying, he saved others, let him save himself, if he be Christ, the chosen of God. And the soldiers also mocked him, coming to him and offering him vinegar, and saying, if thou be the King of the Jews, save thyself. God's not mocked. So they're thinking that what they're doing is that they're mocking him for the situation that he's in. And this is kind of plugging into what we're seeing is that God's not mocked. God's not having a bad day. God hasn't gotten into a situation, the Lord Jesus Christ, God has not gotten into a situation where he's, oops, I've gotten myself into how am I going to get out of this? I've fallen into a bad situation. Instead, they're saying, go save yourself, go save thyself. God's not mocked. He knows exactly what he's doing, even when he looks like he's at his weakest. And that's where you've seen that phrase, even the weakest of God is stronger than man. And so you're seeing this come into play here. He's not being, he's not to be mocked. He knows exactly what he's doing, even in that situation. Be not deceived. God is not mocked. When you see him doing and saying what he's saying, doing what he's doing, he knows exactly what he's doing. Being omniscient and omnipresent. He has everything down to the decimal point. He knows exactly what he's doing. There's more to even be said here. If we look at Job, even Job had something to say back in Job 13, verse 9. So we can get there real quick. And so a good point that comes up as their conversations are going back and forth. We know this happens in Job. One thing that comes up is it says that is it good that he should search you out? Or as one man mocketh another, do ye so mock him? And so it's good to look at that and say, you don't want to talk to God, even in your prayer life, you don't want to talk to God the way you talk to a common man. And so we see that also you don't want to mock, do you mock God as you mock another man? That's not a right thing to do. You want to view God the way he should be viewed, pray to God the way he should be prayed to, and you certainly don't want to mock God the way you would mock a common man. That's absolutely the most wrong thing you could ever do. So be not deceived. God is not mocked. God, understand. He set things up today in operation so that what you sow, you reap, and what you do, whether it's right or wrong, you're going to reap what you sow. And so we see that there in Galatians Chapter 6, verse 7. And it goes on with other verses as well. So the idea is, in this case, what we're looking at is even if it's the idea of selfishness or foolishness, when it comes to the idea of what God's doing today concerning generosity and his grace, based on what he did for us on the cross, this is where Paul's going with this with the Galatians, who says God is not ignorant of all that we do. We shall reap what we sow in inheritance and so on and so forth. And the key verse I'm going to look at is 2 Corinthians Chapter 5, verse 10. 2 Corinthians 5:10, because a lot of people have a different viewpoint, especially when they go to the red letters and put themselves under a covenant, versus what Paul has to say concerning the judgment seat of Christ, concerning the inheritance we would receive, whether it be thrones, dominions, principalities, or powers at the judgment seat of Christ. We see there in 2 Corinthians 5:10, he says, "For we must all appear before the judgment seat of Christ, that everyone may receive the things done in his body." It's done in the church, the body of Christ, according to that he hath done, whether it be good or bad. Now, it's not talking about you're going to go to hell or you're going to go to heaven. It has nothing to do with our salvation. Our salvation is done by the work of Jesus Christ on the cross. So it's not an issue with salvation being, whether we have done good or whether we have done bad. But we do have a judgment concerning our inheritance. Where are we going to be placed? And after we're judged by God, and we know from 1 Corinthians 3 goes all through about we can go to heaven and suffer loss. We can go to heaven and have rewards. And it's going to be everything that we've done in his body according to that we've done, whether it be good or bad. So we can do good and reap rewards. We can do bad and suffer loss. And these are things concerning inheritance, concerning rewards, concerning a lack of rewards, not your salvation. Those are two totally different things. Salvation is one thing, service is another. And so we see that there, that what we reap, we will sow based on that. And that also kicks in our life here on earth as we walk as ambassadors. So we see that there. 1 Corinthians Chapter 3, that whole chapter talks about the judgment seat of Christ, how this plays out accordingly as well. But we see it also in 2 Corinthians 5:10. We see how that works there as well. But, God is not a heavenly genie in a lamp, granting access to whatever we put our sinful hands to. He's not mocked like that. If we don't sow to the right things, we're going to reap the wrong things. And if we don't sow in the right place, we're going to reap the consequences of that. So it's saying, whatsoever, a man soweth, as we see that there in verse 7, going back to Galatians 6:7. Whatsoever a man soweth, that shall he also reap. So if we sow our slothfulness into a situation, we don't study, we don't read, we don't do whatever, we're going to reap, inadequate knowledge. We're going to reap the fact that we don't know something. We're not learning anything. We're not growing. We're going to reap that. We are reaping that based on the fact that we are not doing what we're doing. Or we're going to reap a large benefit of knowledge based on the fact that we ourselves are studying. And God has left that in our capable hands of making free will decisions. We're going to see that there. And so we see that there, if we join a religion, full well understanding that we can rightly divide the word of truth and everything else, and yet we go the wrong direction, we're going to reap that because we have freely chosen to do so and go off the beaten path of the word rightly divided. The other way around is if we completely join up with Pauline truth and go in the same direction that the Bible's, we're trying to line ourselves up with the Bible as much as possible, we will reap the benefits and the rewards of that as well. But it's according to what the Bible tells us its benefits and rewards based on what they're telling us, what the word of truth is telling us. So we see that there. So what we reap into our situations are right fellowship, wrong fellowship. We're going to reap the rewards and the loss of that, both here and in heavenly places. And so if you ever think about this, if you ever notice anybody sowing wrong doctrine into a situation, a wrong gospel, or sowing the red letters into a situation, they'll reap, reaping rewards won't happen because of that. If you go to a church, quote unquote, somewhere, and they're trying to sow to you the gospel of the kingdom, or they're trying to sow to you the red letters, thinking that they're going to go to the pearly gates or the golden city of Revelation 22, and they're going to be a part of God's earthly kingdom, you're going to see that they're trying to sow to you confusion through the Bible wrongly divided, and as a result, they're going to reap confusion back as they try to explain themselves what they're believing in, and it's all about sowing and reaping confusion as a result of that. That's what they're sowing, that's what they're reaping. So we see that, so whatsoever a man sow, any man soweth. If they're sowing confusion, if you join up with confusion, that's what you're going to reap. If we sow right division, according to the word of truth, we're going to reap clarity, understanding of what God has to say, and we study to show ourselves approved, and we reap the benefits of that as well through the Bible rightly divided, the right Bible, the King James Bible, and we'll reap the benefits of that. So we see that there, and we go forth with this. And then, so when we look at that, the idea of sowing, just to clarify sowing and reaping, the definition of sowing would be more so to broadcast, to distribute, or to scatter. And so there's some synonymous words that have to do with sowing. When this talks about whatsoever a man soweth, whatever you're broadcasting out there, whatever you're scattering out there, whatever you're distributing out there, that's what you're going to reap. And reaping meaning that's what you're going to gather back in. That's what you're going to acquire back in. That's what you're going to, bring back in. So we're seeing that there. And so when you think about it, when you hear these different denominations, and they're praying and they're saying, God, why did you do that? Why? Why did you make this happen? Or why did you do this? Or why did you just crying out to God saying, why me? Why me? Whatever it may be. They're thinking that God in this dispensation has done something to them according to a covenant. And so they're thinking, rather than understanding, they've reaped what they've sowed, good or bad, right or wrong, different or indifferent. Their thinking or their understanding is that they've done something in order to make God pour out his wrath on them if it's a bad thing. Or it could be that they think that God has done something to bless them based on the fact that they went to church that day. Or they read their Bible, and therefore God is going to therefore bless them with money, or bless them with a new car, bless them with a man, that type of covenant thinking. And that is incorrect in the dispensation of grace. We've seen this through Paul and his life, and his epistles and his letters and his doctrinal presentation. So we've seen that there, reaping what we're sowing. And so when we look at that, we see the layout for what Paul's talking about with reaping and sowing, just in this context, just in this idea here. And so when we see the idea of covenant standing, some of the things that come into play, some verses that explain that what you do will pay off. What you sow, you're going to reap. When it comes to the idea of covenant standing, what we just talked about a second ago, if we look at a verse of Matthew 19, verse 29. And Matthew 19, verse 29, when it comes to kingdom, when it comes to the earthly kingdom and Israel and the little flock of Israel, what they're going to be sowing and therefore reaping, when it comes to their program and prophecy and the law and everything else, according to their covenant standing, we see there in Matthew 19, verse 29, it says, and everyone that hath forsaken houses, or brethren, or sisters, or father, or mother, or wife, or children, or lands, for my name's sake, shall receive an hundredfold, and shall inherit everlasting life. But many that are first shall be last, and and the last shall be first. So you're seeing many that they're going to reap what they sow, and if they give up that which in this time period will, I'm sorry, not this time period, but during the time where this doctrine comes into play, ages to come. The many that are plugged in and attached to the Antichrist with the mark of the beast and that system that'll be set up, they're going to have to give up and forsake houses, brethren, mother or father, children, lands, and go join up with a little flock for Christ's sake. During that time, they're going to receive back, they'll reap a hundredfold and inherit everlasting life in the earthly kingdom. That's what this verse is talking about. This is an example of that covenant standing. What they reap, what they sow, they'll end up reaping back a hundredfold in this case. So we're seeing just an example of that. That's a spiritual lesson we're learning from the idea of reaping and sowing. So we see that come into play there. But proper sowing for the believer today, for the ambassador today, starts with the inner man, with our thoughts and our choices, our time and attention, opportunity and affection, and comes out to play in our life. That's where proper sowing starts. If we look at Philippians chapter 4, verse 8, we want to see where proper sowing is going to begin, and we want to do that in a right way. So Philippians chapter 4, verse 8, it starts out with the proper sowing for the believer, and we'd want to do that with our thoughts and our choices, our time and our attention, and things like that, so that everything plays out as we sow to the Spirit, as we do things according to the Spirit of God. We see here it says, finally, brethren, in Philippians 4:8, finally, brethren, whatsoever things are true, whatsoever things are honest, whatsoever things are just, whatsoever things are pure, whatsoever things are lovely, whatsoever things are of good report, if there be any virtue, and if there be any praise, think on these things. And so we want to start thinking on the right things, sowing to our inner man the right things of the Spirit of God, the right things of the word rightly divided, the right things of Jesus Christ preached according to the revelation of the mystery, rather than what the world would tell us to do. We don't want to line up with what we're, as we said earlier, what others are sowing to us. Others are broadcasting to us. You know that there's people broadcasting things to you according to different agendas all day long. You don't want to reap what they're sowing to you. You want to disregard it. You want to use your discernment on it. People are trying to tell you things every day, and you want to make sure that you're coming to the word rightly divided and coming to a point where if there be any virtue and if there be any praise, you're thinking on the right things. You're not thinking on everything that comes your way. You're making sure that if you have to hear it, you discern it and bring it back to your final authority, which is the King James Bible rightly divided. So we see that there, that we want to reap the right things and we want to sow it to our inner man according to the word of truth. So we see that there, and then it explains why things actually start to clear up when we do that with right division. So if we look also at Colossians chapter 3, and I believe it's in verse 1. We'll start with verse 1. Colossians 3:1, as we build upon what we were looking at in Philippians 4:8, Colossians 3:1 goes on to read, if ye then be risen with Christ, seek those things which are above, where Christ sitteth on the right hand of God. Set your affection on things above, not on things on the earth. For ye are dead, and your life is hid with Christ in God. When Christ, who is our life, shall appear, then shall ye also appear with him in glory. So we're seeing that Christ is our life, and what he says about life, what he says about death, what he says, we saw a lot about that in that previous seminar 2 weeks ago, about walking our walk rightly divided. Are we to walk as dead, understanding what death is supposed to be a great thing for the believer. It's almost like a graduation, and if you want to call it that, that type of thing where you're sowing to your inner man what the Bible has to say, what God has to say, how God's viewpoint works on how life is, not how the world broadcasts information to you. And there's many ways that the world does that through all sorts of different ways. So we want to sow to our inner man the right information, not the wrong information. And we discern what we hear so that we have a proper channel of how we're filtering everything in. So we see that there. And this is how we're going to this. It explains how things start to clear up according to the word of truth. We're sowing to our inner man correctly. And so rightfully sowing grace into a situation, we can see that if we look at 2 Corinthians chapter 9 and verse 5. When you see an example of how you rightfully sow to the inner man, how you rightfully sow grace, which is our topic, sowing and reaping grace. When you see an example, how do I rightfully sow? Or what are some conditions, or what are some parameters, or how exactly am I going to sow to my inner man? What's a scenario that Paul gives, or Paul uses, where sowing takes place, and it works, and we see how this plays out. What kind of action? In 2 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 5, goes on to read, therefore, I thought it necessary to exhort the brethren that they would go before unto you and make it beforehand your bounty, whereof ye had noticed before, that the same might be ready as a matter of bounty and not as of covetousness. But this I say, he which soweth sparingly shall reap also sparingly, and he which soweth bountifully shall reap also bountifully. So you see the idea, if you sow sparingly, you reap sparingly, you sow bountifully, you reap bountifully. It's all up to the choices, the free will choices that you make. We talked about that earlier. And it says, every man according as he purposeth in his heart, so let him give, not grudgingly or of necessity, for God loveth a cheerful giver. So verse 7 is kind of the key point as to how do you sow. If you want to sow to your inner man, you want to study, you want to learn, verse 7 says, every man according as he purposeth in his heart. What's the purpose of why you're studying? If you have no purpose, and you make a right purpose according to God, according to God's will. If you have no purpose for studying, find a right one. With the right heart, have a right purpose. And when you do so, don't do it grudgingly. Don't do it of necessity. When people do it of necessity, they think that they're under that covenant. And the more I give money to a church, the more I study my Bible, the more God's going to bless me with material blessings and give me money and give me health and he's going to bless my family with health and wealth. And that's not it. That's you're praying out of necessity. You think that by doing the things that you do, that God's going to go out and bless you. And that's you under a covenant, which nobody is under today. So we don't do what we do out of necessity. We don't do what we do out of grudgingly. And religion will try to put you to build up a grudge. And when you do what you do, building up a grudge, you don't want to do it. You do it because you're almost forced to do it. You do it just to make the other person or make the other group or make the other thing. Yeah, I'll do it. Just get out of my way. Stop asking. Stop bothering me. So you do it with a grudge. Your heart's not right when you do what you do. And God essentially is saying through Paul to the Corinthians, don't give or don't do what you do with a grudge. And don't do what you do out of necessity. Do it because God loveth a cheerful giver. Do it cheerfully. What you do it cheerfully. As much as you can, at least. I mean, there's some things we do in life, provide, and everything else that we do because we have to. But as much as you can, do it cheerfully. And that's why you want to sow to yourself, sow to the Spirit, sow to the inner man, rightful study as the example. And many other things. Just think about the example that you would apply this into, the idea of sowing and reaping, and do so cheerfully. So we see that there. Cheerfully and willingly. So as we bring it back to Galatians, and we see that there, that's just verse 7, Galatians chapter 6 and verse 7, we're seeing that's the idea that Paul is bringing to him, saying, be not deceived, God is not mocked. God sees everything, God knows all that we're doing, so we don't want to go ahead and try to trick God, not that that's a possible thing, but if you want to say, well, I don't want to do this, but I'll do it, just to get brownie points with God. God sees what you're doing. You may be able to trick mankind, or all of mankind, or some of mankind, but God sees exactly what's going on. Sees your heart, knows what you're doing, why you're doing what you're doing. God's not mocked. For whatsoever a man soweth, that shall he also reap, both in rewards in heavenly places if we're saved, and destination if we're not saved. He knows what we're trusting, why we're trusting. So we see that there. And in verse 8 goes on to say, for he that soweth to his flesh shall of the flesh reap corruption. But he that soweth to the Spirit shall of the Spirit reap life everlasting. So as we go into Galatians chapter 6, verse 8, we're seeing there, of course, it's talking about, for he that soweth to his flesh shall of the flesh reap corruption. So we're seeing what happens. The idea of when you sow to your flesh instead of your spirit, we're body, soul, and spirit, and we want to walk according to the flesh, walk into the spirit, not the flesh. If we look at, say, Romans chapter 6, and that whole chapter is an excellent chapter just in itself, but Romans 6, verse 21, talking about a right way to walk. We're sowing in the Spirit. Romans 6, verse 21. When it goes on and talks about, he that soweth to his flesh shall of the flesh reap corruption. And that would make sense. You sow to your flesh, that's what you're going to end up, as a result, reaping. We see in verse 21, it says, what fruit had ye then in those things whereof ye are now ashamed? For the end of those things is death. But now being made free from sin and become servants to God, ye have your fruit unto holiness in the end everlasting life. And so we're seeing that this is where this comes into play, that where you sow to your flesh, you can end up being greatly ashamed of doing the things that you do as you sow to your flesh rather than the Spirit, which we have as believers greatly. For the end of those things is death. But we're being made free from sin. We become servants to God. And now we have fruit into holiness. And we know that from Galatians chapter 5. And the end of everlasting life. So we see a great benefit with that cross-reference in Romans chapter 6 to where we are in Galatians chapter 6, verse 8. And so we want to understand that there. And if we look even at a couple chapters over in Romans chapter 13, in verse 14. And in Romans chapter 13, verse 14, we want to say that we don't even want to have any kind of provision made for the flesh, if at all possible. We want to more sow to the Spirit, and therefore we can reap of the things of the Spirit. We don't want to make provision for the flesh. We don't want to sow to the flesh. We don't want to make provision for all these wicked possibilities. We want to cut them off at the pass. We see there in Romans 13, verse 14, it says, but put ye on the Lord Jesus Christ, and make not provision for the flesh to fulfill the lusts thereof. And so we don't even want to make provision for the flesh. If there's a way you can get in trouble, let's cut that off, if at all possible. And more so it may be possible, let's cut it off so that we don't find ourselves getting into trouble. So we see that there, and make not provision for the flesh to fulfill the lusts. Our flesh has plenty of lust within it, and instead of making an abundant possibility, an easy way to get to it, let's make it hard for the flesh to retrieve those lusts that are within. Let's make it hard so that we can understand that the old man is dead, and that we want to go ahead and put on the Lord Jesus Christ and continue to walk and operate in the new man, and sow to the new man, sow to the Spirit. So we see that there. We don't want to sow to the old man because he's dead. In fact, proactively take away opportunity, as we see here in the outline, to do evil. And our flesh wants to do things opposite to God. If we look at Ephesians, First Timothy 5. 1 Timothy 5, verse 14. Go to that cross-reference real quick. 1 Timothy 5, verse 14. We see here that what it's saying here is that I will therefore that the young woman marry, bear children, guide the house, give none occasion to the adversary to speak reproachfully. So we're seeing here that the idea for, in this case, the example being used as God to Paul and Paul to Timothy, is that Paul is telling Timothy to have the younger women, in this chapter talking about the younger women, have them do things to where there's no occasion for the adversary to speak reproachfully, because they're doing all these different things. It's making it harder for them to do, to have their flesh operate in wickedness, because they're doing so many other things. Have them marry, have them bear children, have them guide the house, and therefore give no occasion for the adversary to speak reproachfully. We see that there. That's the idea. And there's things for men, young men, old men. Titus talks a lot about this as well, older women as well. The idea is that no matter who you are in your as a believer, as an ambassador, you're making sure that you crucify the flesh, die daily, and put on the new man and continue in the new man, sowing to the Spirit, or sowing and reaping grace on purpose. So we see that there. And we understand that the flesh wants to do things opposite. So therefore, we're going to go ahead and not make it easy to reap corruption. We look at also Ephesians 4:27. This is where I was going to go originally. Ephesians 4:27. We want to go here for a reason. Talks about here, not to let the sun go down upon your wrath, and neither give place to the devil. There's a lot of things. There's the wiles of the devil out there, the snares of the devil out there, the things that are the devil's out there in this present evil world, in this society, this culture that belong to the devil. Don't give place for the devil to set his to walk into his traps. There are all sorts of different religions out there where the devil is the god of this world. We don't want to walk into these traps and fall for it or help others to fall into it. We want to do the opposite and warn others about what's going on out there, what the devil's plans are, what God's plans are, what the Bible rightly divided has to say, what salvation is, everything else. We don't want to give place to the devil. We don't want to give place to our flesh. We want to sow to the Spirit. And therefore, that's all about sowing and reaping grace to those who need it, which is pretty much everybody. I can't think of anyone who doesn't need God's grace. So we see that there in Galatians chapter 6, verse 8. And so, as we intentionally sow sin, for example, we reap guilt as the example. If we're going to continue and sow sin, guilt would be the result of what we reap. So we want to do the opposite. We want to sow to the Spirit and therefore reap righteousness, reap good results of what we're seeing. And so two things we see is we don't want to sow to the old man and we don't want to sow to the law. And we had mentioned a little bit earlier about covenant standing. We don't want to sow to that situation. We don't want to sow to that mindset. We don't want to sow to those things that we may have of different religions that we came out of. We don't go back under that and think that way. So if we look even at, if we look at some of those examples about sowing to the old man, we're not going to give place to the devil. We're not going to give place to the old man. We're not doing that. But even when it comes to the idea of sowing to the law, if we look at Romans chapter 2 in verse 6, we see that for Israel, they were to sow to what was theirs. When it came to the idea of the law, when it came to law righteousness, if I'll give out a cross-reference, it's not on our outline, it's Deuteronomy 6:25. It was their righteousness to do the things under the law. Nobody kept 613 points of law, but they were to do those things. Romans 2:6 reads, who will render to every man according to his deeds. Of course, it's not us, but that is God talking to Israel, saying that to them who by patient continuance and well-doing seek for glory and honor and immortality, eternal life. But unto them that are contentious and do not obey the truth, but obey unrighteousness, indignation, and wrath, tribulation and anguish upon every soul of a man that doeth evil, of the Jew first and also of the Gentile. But glory, honor, and peace to every man that worketh good, to the Jew first and also to the Gentile. For there is no respect of persons with God. For as many as have sinned without law shall also perish without law. Again, talking about Israel, their covenant standing. And as many as have sinned in the law shall be judged by the law. And then it continues out throughout the whole chapter talking about covenant standing and law righteousness, that idea. Romans chapter 1 talks about the Gentiles. Romans chapter 2 talks about Israel and the Jews. And then Romans chapter 3 says we've all sinned. But you're seeing that in Romans chapter 2, getting back to what we're talking about, we don't want to sow to the law. We don't want to sow to that covenant understanding where if we were to read Romans 2, if we were to read all of prophecy and think that that's us, or mix the doctrines of thinking that somehow prophecy is mystery and mystery is prophecy and Paul belongs to prophecy, and you just mix the whole thing up. We don't want to go ahead and read Romans 2 thinking that, well, if I sin without law, I'm going to perish without law, and if I sinned in the law, I'll be judged by the law. You're not going to be judged by the law. But if I think that I've sinned in the law, then I'm going to be judged by that. If I'm told in Leviticus not to eat pork, and I go ahead and I eat pork, I'm going to be judged by God in 1 Corinthians 3. And this wrong thinking takes place. This covenant thinking takes place. And so you're taking verses meant for Israel. You're taking verses meant speaking to Israel, even in Romans chapter 9, especially in Romans chapter 9, 10, and 11. And you go ahead and you think and you put yourself under the law. So we don't want to sow to that mentality. We don't want to sow to that thinking. Even if we have friends, family, and others that are already in that thinking, we don't want to sow our minds to that thinking. We want to sow and reap grace, which is our topic for today. So we see that there. And even if we look at Romans 6:14, we see that Paul explains to us why. Romans 6:14 goes on to read as what we all know. Sin shall not have dominion over you. The law would make it more abundantly honest. For sin shall not have dominion over you, for ye are not under the law, but under grace. And so that would make it clear we're under grace, and this is why. So as we're under grace, as God dispenses it to us today, we want to go ahead and sow it, reap it to our inner man, or sow it to our inner man, and reap therefore of it cheerfully and willingly. And this is why things happen the way they do. So if we're sowing confusion, that's what we're going to reap. If we're sowing strong, stable information, we're going to reap that as well. And so, unfortunately, all of society doesn't do that. So that's why we're living in a world where it's mostly confusing. Not that we are confused by it. The Bible tells us it's going to be a confusing world, a present evil world. But we understand why that is, because we have the Bible dispensing the information to us, and as we believe that, we operate according to it and go forth with it. So we see that there. So we're not going to sow to that law mentality, to that covenant standing mentality. We're not going to sow to the old man either. We're not going to make the old man stronger either. So we see that well. But Paul made this point to the Galatians because of the doctrine of those Judaizers that were coming in. And so that's why we see that in Galatians chapter 6, verse 7, and Galatians chapter 6, verse 8. It's because the Judaizers were coming in to the Galatians and saying how they had to be circumcised and how they had to follow the law. And so he had to say that to them, that for he that soweth to his flesh shall of the flesh reap corruption. Oh, the flesh loves religion. The flesh loves to do things thinking that they can earn points with God. The old man does. And so Paul had to tell them, you're going to reap corruption by doing these things. And so Paul made the point to the Galatians because of the doctrine of the Judaizers. All systems of religion are so adjusted so that they appeal to the fallen nature of the flesh, while at the same time allowing justification for sin. If you've sinned all week, just show up in a Catholic a religion that teaches Catholic doctrine, pray a few things, give a couple bucks, and everything you've done is not only forgiven for this week, but hey, you're good to go for next week. Keep on sinning; it's no big deal. There's no system of salvation. You don't know if you're going to heaven, but hey, just keep on sinning. It's good to go as long as you come back and just drop off your sin and just keep going. That's the Catholic way of doing things. Just as the example, there's other religions that have it set up for other ways. Come in, drop something off, do a little deed, do a couple rituals and rites, and then just keep going. That's how religion sets this up. There was no need for faith in an atoning sacrifice like Jesus Christ dying on the cross to pay for sin as a fully sufficient payment. That paid for sin once and for all. In this case, they were going on in their sin while yet seeking to buy the favor of God and their so-called good works. And that's how the currency that they were looking to do was have their good works pay for their sins, and that would be impossible. That's not going to work. But religion leads to corruption and life in the flesh, and that's why Paul said what he said in Galatians chapter 6, verse 8. And so we see that there. And so some more examples that we can see in sowing and reaping under the law, that covenant thinking. We'll look at some spiritual lessons. Would be if we go all the way back to Jeremiah chapter 12, in verse 13. We want to look at some examples, even from Israel's history, so we can gain some understanding from where they were at and what they thought, and that covenant standing, how that came into play, even for them. In Jeremiah chapter 12, verse 13, we read this, that according to the covenant God set up with them in Leviticus chapter 26 and 27 and 28, it goes on to read, or Leviticus 26 and 27. It goes on to say that they have sown wheat, but shall reap thorns. They have put themselves to pain, but shall not profit. And they shall be ashamed of your revenues because of the fierce anger of the Lord. So when we see the idea of what it was for Israel, what it was for the Jew, what it was in prophecy under covenant standing, when they're doing all the wrong things with the wrong heart, then when they sow wheat, they're going to reap thorns. They sow what they're looking for when it comes to crops or whatever it is. All they're going to reap is thorns, and that would be concerning Israel. They're not doing everything that God said in Genesis 12. Therefore, they're going to reap according to the covenant of what he says in Leviticus 26. And this is how things come out to play This is not why, if you think about why your grass isn't growing today, and if you see there, they put themselves to pain but shall not profit. This is not why things play out. If you're in pain, you think, well, I'm suffering for God, therefore I'll probably get something good for this in heaven. If you put yourself to pain, make sure that what's happening is at least for the cause of the right cause of preaching Christ according to the revelation of the mystery. Not so much you're going to hope that by your suffering you're somehow better than the next person. It's not going to work like that. So we see this here, just an idea in Jeremiah 12. 13. If we continue on, look at Hosea chapter 10 and verse 13. See, it's there, Hosea 10:13. Let's see. There we go. Hosea 10:13 goes on to talk more about sowing and reaping under a covenant standing. So this is not us, but we're learning from this, that other believers in prophecy under the law. It says there in Hosea 10:13, it says, ye have plowed wickedness and ye have reaped iniquity. Ye have eaten the fruit of lies, because thou didst not, or didst trust in thy way, in the multitude of thy mighty men. Therefore shall a tumult arise among thy people, and all thy fortresses shall be spoiled, as Shalman spoiled Betharbel in the day of the battle. And so we see there in verse 13, ye have plowed wickedness, and ye have reaped iniquity. And so this is what he's saying to this unfaithful Israel, that as they plow wickedness, they're going to reap iniquity as a result. You can learn this as well as we sow to the flesh. You plow wickedness, you reap iniquity. We're not so special that God's a respecter of persons. He's actually not a respecter of persons. If we plow iniquity, or we plow wickedness, we reap iniquity. We can learn that lesson from this verse. It's a right thing that we learn. If we look even at even the famous verse, if we go to 2 Chronicles 7:14. Now this is one of those famous verses. It's on every bumper sticker in town, and it comes into play as we kind of go back. Find it as well. 2 Chronicles 7:14. This is the big bumper sticker verse. 2 Chronicles 7:14, going here on purpose. Now here's sowing and reaping, based on what they do, based on what they don't do. It says, if my people, which are called by my name, shall humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, if they sow these things, if they do these actions, then will I hear from heaven and will forgive their sin and will heal their land. We don't get our land healed because we call by his name and humble ourselves and pray. That doesn't happen to us today. But these are people in the covenant standing that do these things, and as a result, based on Leviticus 26 and Genesis 12, these things will happen for them in 2 Chronicles chapter 7. So these things happen according to sowing and reaping in a covenant standing. These don't happen to us today. We're not in this book. We're not in that book per se. So we're not in this one, but we do see the idea of sowing and reaping, and it takes a popular bumper sticker verse to kind of see this come into play more often. Is that and the first word is if. So if, according to the covenant, if my people, Israel, which are called by my name, shall humble themselves and pray and so on and so forth, then as a result of the covenant, and they do these things, they'll reap what they sow. That's if they do those things. We're not so much that way at all. I would say so. We're not that way at all. We trust the gospel. We're saved. Christ did the work, and we're saved regardless of what happens after that fact. We believed in the gospel. We're saved and sealed. Ephesians 1:13. According to the gospel, 1 Corinthians 15:1-4. So we see that there. And so this is how this comes out to play. As we bring this back to Galatians 6, verse 8, talking about he that soweth to the Spirit shall of the Spirit reap life everlasting. And so we see that there. And so when we look at these ideas, and you can even see more about this, all of Matthew chapter 5 talks about the idea of sowing and reaping according to a covenant. That's why he says, blessed are they who mourn. Blessed are they who are comforted, because you can either be blessed or you can be cursed. according to Leviticus 26. So when you read that in Matthew 5, that's not us. That's not the body of Christ. Those are people who can be blessed or cursed. God's telling Israel how they can be blessed in the tribulation. That's Matthew 5. So we see that there. But Paul's not talking about reaping, your dreams or, social change or presidential elections or anything about money or politics. And what's reaped is either corruption, if you sow to the flesh, or life everlasting, through rightful inheritance or an abundance of inheritance if you sow to the Spirit. And so this is what Paul's talking about in Galatians chapter 6. He's not talking about reaping, the car of your dreams, reaping the job of your dreams, and so on and so forth. He's talking about what you reap, you sow, based on God's purpose and plan, based on what we see in Ephesians 3:20, based on what God has going on today. And so this is where we want to set our affections on. This is where we want to set our purpose about. And this is how we set forth and how we operate in the idea of reaping and sowing grace, according to God's purpose and plan, not ours. So we see that there. But then we also read in that verse, but he that soweth to the Spirit shall of the Spirit reap life everlasting. So as we go further in our outline, we read more about how we want to proactively choose to agree and make decisions according to God's will in the King James Bible, rightly divided. And that would be a right thing to do. So it goes back to Romans 6, talking more about that. It also goes on, if we look at 2 Timothy chapter 3 and verse 10. And we see that here in 2 Timothy chapter 3, verse 10. And as we go forth and we do this, we make decisions according to God's will, to the point where Paul himself could even say to Timothy that thou hast fully known my doctrine, manner of life, purpose, faith, long-suffering, charity, patience, persecutions, afflictions, which came to me at Antioch, at Iconium, at Lystra, what persecutions I endured. And so as he talks about this here, he's referring to everything that they know about Paul. And so as he says this, these are the things that he's sowing to himself based on the purpose and plan and will of God. When it comes to this, he's gone through persecutions and afflictions according to the purpose and plan of God. They also know his doctrine. They know his manner of life. They know his purpose. They know his faith, because they're all God's purpose and plan and faith. They're not his own individual personal ideas. Those are Paul's based on what God told him, according to the revelation of the mystery. So those are the things that we see there. That these are the things that are God's will. And as you do God's will, you will suffer persecution. You will go through afflictions. And what a joy that'll be when we understand the doctrine in 2 Corinthians chapter 12. So we see that there, as we suffer for the right reasons. We don't suffer in order to, in a religious way. But the more I suffer, the more I make myself look great. It has nothing to do with that. When you suffer for the right reasons, then we understand why we're suffering. And it makes sense. But we also understand how people know our doctrine, manner of life, purpose, faith, long-suffering, and charity and patience. Those are also other good things as well. So as we bring it back to Galatians chapter 6, verse 9, we get into the next verse now. And what we see there says, and let us not be weary in well-doing, for in due season we shall reap if we faint not. And what an important verse this one is. As we look at this, even the Apostle Peter brings up some information about this. And of course, it's going to be all about how we can learn from this spiritual lessons when it comes to this. But look at 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 58. And in 1 Corinthians 15, in verse 58, when it talks about the idea of what we're seeing here. Okay. It says, therefore, my beloved brethren, be ye steadfast, unmovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, for as much as ye know that your labor is not in vain in the Lord. And so as we see that there, he says, let us not be weary in well-doing, for in due season we shall reap. So eventually, as you continue to work and be steadfast, unmovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, what you sow, you will reap. It may not be instantaneous. It may not be in the first week or month or even year, a couple of years that you see what you're going to see. But as you continue to abound in the work, as you continue to believe in what you're doing for the Lord, and understanding that what his word has to say is you sow to your spirit rather than your flesh, you'll reap what's going on according to God's purpose and plan. And according to the rightly divided King James Bible, you'll reap what's needed and what's right. We see that there. And for in due season we shall reap. And that's why we don't want to be weary of well-doing, as he goes on to say this. Even like we said earlier, the Apostle Peter mentioned something about this, even to the little flock. If we look at 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 15. We'll get a good spiritual lesson out of this. 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 15. He talks about doing, having well-doing. He talks about that idea. He says, for so is the will of God, that with well-doing you may put to silence the ignorance of foolish men. Again, that's something good we can learn from. Doing well would put to silence the ignorance of foolish men. That's a right thing that we would want to learn from. Nothing wrong with learning that. That's a good lesson. And as we look a little further, I believe it's one more chapter over, 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 17, he mentions it again. And he says in 1 Peter 3:17, he says, for it is better, if the will of God be so, that ye suffer for well-doing than for evil-doing. So it's a short lesson there. It's better to be doing, having well-doing than evil-doing. A simple lesson, but it's be caught doing right than doing wrong. So we see that from the Apostle Peter as he's teaching these lessons to the little flock. And of course, they're going to be doing that for their covenant standing. But nonetheless, it's a right thing to understand that we would rather be doing right than wrong. And we can put to ignorance foolish men by having well-doing. So we see that there. But as we read back to Galatians 6, verse 9, and let us not be weary in well-doing. There's a lot of times where you can be out there trying to do something for the believers or for the church, for the saints, for studying the Bible rightly divided, and you're not seeing any profit immediately. You're not seeing any profit in what you're doing. But as we follow the instructions of the Apostle Paul, it says there that for in due season we shall reap if we faint not. Now, we don't know how often that could take or how long that could take, but in due season you'll reap if you faint not. And it doesn't mean faint like you're just going to drop on the ground and faint and lose consciousness. But even the idea of fainting, it goes on to talk about how, I found a good couple of words that are synonymous with it. But it also goes on to just talk about how fainting can just be how you just stop doing what you're doing. You can grow weak or feeble of doing something. Now, not even in your physical strength, just in your mental strength. You can grow feeble because you're not seeing any results, and you can grow discouraged, and you can grow, you could faint just from the idea that you don't want to do this anymore. This Bible study's too hard, and learning the Bible rightly divided is not working, and talking to my family, and talking to my friends, and talking to my neighbors, and talking to my coworkers. No one's believing this stuff. I'm growing faint of this. I'm growing weary of this. I'm growing, and so Paul's saying the opposite. Paul's saying, let us not be weary in well-doing, for in due season we shall reap. We shall reap in due season if we faint not. Now, you may want to change tactics. You may want to work on another way to do this. You may want to work on another person who in turn can help you work on the main person you'd like to work on. You may change things up a little bit, but you don't want to change and stop doing what you're doing. And that may be another way to reach your goals. Is that same goal, you're just going to try it a different way. And if you try it a different way, perhaps you might see different results, but never give up on what you're doing. For in due season we shall reap if we faint not. You don't want to faint and stop and quit and give up. And that's kind of like a basic motivational message, but this is what Paul is saying about the idea of sowing and reaping grace into a situation. So we're seeing that this is how it's going to play out. But the idea of sowing and reaping in the dispensation of grace. So he's saying this here. And if we look even at 2 Thessalonians 2:15, Paul says this to the Thessalonians. 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 in verse 15. Get there as well. And he says, therefore, brethren, stand fast and hold the traditions which ye have been taught, whether by word or our epistle. So he's telling them to stand fast and hold. Don't faint, don't give up. But stand fast and hold these traditions. Hold what's been taught to them. And he goes on to mention that there to them. So the Thessalonians were to do that. And they did. They were the best church in the Bible for Paul. And this is what he tells them: stand fast and hold. And that works out well for them. And so he mentions this to them there. And so this may be what it looks like sometimes, operating in spite of circumstances, not due to them. Because if you look at your circumstances and you believe that every circumstance that comes your way is a result of God, that's, again, you looking at it from a covenant perspective, thinking that, it rained today, so God must be trying to stop me from doing what I'm trying to do. Or it's hot outside today, so God must be trying to tell me to stay inside and not go out and reach people with the gospel. That kind of a thinking is a covenant thinking. You're not under those circumstances. If you want to go out and reach people, find a way to reach people in the rain. Try to reach people when it's hot. Try to reach people when it's cold and snowing, or whatever the issues are that are in your area. Don't allow the conditions of life to constrain you. The love of Christ is to constrain you, and you operate in spite of the circumstances. In spite of what's going on, Christ is the head, and we're his body, and we operate in spite of the circumstances. Now, as we see that there, we're not to allow the circumstances of life or circumstance to determine our zeal for Christ, and many do that. Many Christians allow the circumstances to tell them that they need to be weary and stop reaping, stop sowing, that kind of thing. And the main way to identify the followers of, say, the Calvinistic God of circumstances by their dependence on their surroundings. And many times they do that to define their spirituality, or even to define their salvation. They'll not be active Bible students per se. However, if they are, they'll use the doctrine of prophecy and mystery to define their agenda, and I call that proof texting. And this is just used to prove that the God of the Bible is actually their God of circumstance, John Calvin. Most of these verses are from God's covenant with Israel and prophecy under the law, and usually involve the ways which God would intervene with Israel. And you see it a lot in Romans chapter 9, where they twist and use the God of John Calvin's mind, the God of circumstance, and they use that to say that's the God of the Bible, and that's not the case. And so when it comes to reaping and sowing, they'll try to do that based on the circumstances around them. And they'll try to say that they're so blessed, they're so saved, because they have a lot of money in the bank, or they have a lot of things, or they're not like that guy over there, or they're not like this thing over here, or they're not like this situation over there. They're so glad they don't have this situation, whatever it may be. And so it's a comparing and contrasting based on situations and circumstances, not on the doctrine of the Bible rightly divided. And so this is one thing when it comes to reaping and sowing, we want to do so according to what Paul has to tell us in the word rightly divided. And so we see that there. And so when it comes to this, it's verse 9 says, we shall reap in due season if we faint not. And again, that goes back to growing weak or feeble. And some examples on how the idea of fainting comes up in the Bible, comes up quite a bit. If we look at Psalm 119, verse 81, we'll just see how the word faint comes up again and again, so we just kind of know it a little bit better. Psalm 119, verse 81, two verses I want to bring up so that we kind of illustrate that word a little bit better, just so that we understand it's not just this dropping on the floor type of thing. But Psalm 119, verse 81. Go there. Goes on to read, my soul fainteth for thy salvation, but I hope in thy word. So we're seeing this play out here, this idea that they're hoping for, and salvation is when God comes back and rescues Israel's enemies in Psalms. But their soul fainteth for salvation. See that idea there. If we look at Proverbs 24, verse 10. It's going to come up again. Proverbs 24, verse 10. Solomon writes this book to his son, Rehoboam. And he lets Rehoboam know this in Proverbs 24, verse 10. He says, if thou faint in the day of adversity, thy strength is small. Again, not that they plops on the floor unconscious, but if you give up in the day of adversity, your strength is small. And so that's what he's saying here. If you faint in the day of adversity, in the day of adversity, you want to press on and go forward. And you want that day of adversity to make you stronger. And so you're going to press on and go forward. So we see that there in Proverbs 24:10. So we see more about this, and there's a lot more that comes up. Even if you look at Let's find some more here. 2 Corinthians 4:16. We'll start to wrap up here. 2 Corinthians 4:16. Goes on to read, for which cause we faint not. We're not going to give up. But though our outward man perish, yet the inward man is renewed day by day. And that's sowing to the Spirit. That's what we want to be doing here. We want to be sowing to the Spirit grace, the word rightly divided, allow the inner man to get stronger and stronger and stronger as we sow to it the word rightly divided. And as we sow to it rightfully, making sure that we cut off all access to the flesh intentionally, so that the flesh doesn't get stronger and stronger in its wickedness, but that the Spirit grows stronger and stronger internally, and that we discern all messages that are coming our way, so we don't receive any wrong, as we would call it, wrong broadcasts, but we understand and discern what we're supposed to be hearing from the Word of God rightly divided. For our light affliction, verse 17, which is but for a moment, worketh for us a far more exceeding and eternal weight of glory, while we look not at the things which are seen, but at the things which are not seen. For the things which are seen are temporal, but the things which are not seen are eternal. And so we see that there in verse 16, 17, and 18, referring to the idea that we're not going to faint. We faint not. Our outward man perisheth, and the inward man is renewed day by day, as it should be. So we see that there. And even in Ephesians 3:13. In Ephesians 3:13, as Paul was writing to the Ephesians, he wanted them to know something. And he said that, wherefore I desire that ye faint not at my tribulations for you, which is your glory. As you remember from 2 Corinthians 12, when Paul went through tribulations and persecutions, that was a great thing. That was something he could rejoice in. And this is the example of that in Ephesians 3:13, where he says, wherefore I desire that ye faint not at my tribulations for you, because it's your glory that he suffers and is able to make them stronger. When you suffer for doing that which is right, to teach somebody, help somebody, it's actually going to be for their glory if somebody learns something from what you're going through. And it's not fun for you at the time, but if somebody can learn something from what you're going through, somebody else picks up on it, somebody else learns from it, somebody else is able to get saved because of the suffering you're going through. You don't want to go through the suffering, but as you do so and somebody learns from it, it's for their glory. They've benefited from your suffering. Of course, we're not going to try for it. We're not going to make ourselves a human doormat. But as it happens, and it's going to happen, it's the way of the normal life of a Christian ambassador. Someone learned from our suffering. May God be the glory, and may it benefit those who learn from it. And as we even teach others through suffering, let alone through everything else, may it be a joyful thing for them. So as we sow to our spirit, we sow and reap grace each and every day. And this was some of the information that we wanted to present today for this topical study of sowing and reaping grace. So with that, we'll stop here and see if there's any thoughts or anything on this concept in the dispensation of grace.
I do have a question. Just something real quick. Because I got caught flat-footed, I didn't expect this response, but when I told some family members about our accident and how things turned out, that we were fortunate in the circumstance that as it was.
Yeah.
They said, you've got a guardian angel on your shoulder, and I just somehow I just didn't expect somebody to say that, and so because I was caught flat-footed, I had found myself tongue-tied. Yeah. What could I have said to, again, seasons with grace?
Yeah.
But what could I have said in response to that?
Well, you just said that you're thankful. That, yeah. You could have said, "Well, I'm thankful for everything that we went through." Mm-hmm. And that would make me say, "What are you thankful for everything you went through?" I mean, you could say that if the worst had happened, that even through the accident.
Well, I did explain that. I mean, in that, I did explain that we were fortunate with all the other details, it could have been worse, and so on and so forth.
Well, no, it's the other way around. If you had crashed completely, if you had graduated in that,
Yeah.
you would have gone on to greater glory.
Well, no, I get that, but
that's the end. If you had completely passed on in that.
Well, I understand that, but how does that relate to somebody saying you have a guardian angel on your shoulder?
Yeah, how do you answer the situation with the angel? How do you discredit those people that use angels that way?
Well, I guess when it comes to the idea of the angel, well, they're gonna talk about their angel, but then I guess you refer it back to, you could use it as an opening, and because they're gonna talk, they will talk about the guardian angel.
Yeah.
You can refer to it as you can give them a Bible verse, Ephesians 3:10, and refer to them about how my angels are learning from me, not the other way around. Or my angels are, that type of thing. That'll start a whole, like, what, an opening. Because talking about angels is going to be a wrong thing, but you can talk about how making an opening for the gospel, saying that my angels, or the angels, are learning from me in the dispensation of grace. That might even be too much for them. That might be a little over their head. But it's kind of an idea where you want to bring it back to salvation, back to the gospel, that kind of an idea. Right, Gene?
John, what about that verse that I'm going to mutilate, that says people that talk about angels vainly puffed up, talking about things that they don't really know of, don't be just not really distracted, but don't be put off by that. I can't remember the verse.
Yeah, that's I think it's 2:8. Let's see, it's not 2:8. Yeah, I know what you're talking about. It's in Colossians, and that's is it 2:18 to? Yeah, 2:18. Let no man beguile you of your reward in involuntary humility and worshiping of angels, intruding into those things which he hath not seen, vainly puffed up by his fleshly mind. Again, that's the perfect verse, but I don't know how much is the unbeliever or the religious individual going to understand, whether it's Ephesians 3:10 or
Well, they won't know until they hear it. Now they may, being a natural person and not a spiritual, which doesn't connect, they may not get that, but it may click, it may not, but unless you use it, they're not going to get it.
Yeah.
So you try, and then you leave it to God and the Holy Spirit.
Yeah. Or you can ask them questions about,
They don't understand the purpose of angels, obviously.
Yeah, or you can say, you must have had a guardian angel. And say, well, what part did the guardian angel do for us?
Yeah.
That type of thing. But they, like you said, it's a good conversation piece, because they're looking to say you must have a guardian angel looking out for you, and then they just want the conversation to end right there. They're not looking to go deeper into.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I don't think they ever mean for it to go into a discussion.
Yeah.
But I think it would be useful for us as Christians to have the doctrine of angels developed, so we know how to answer, because it comes from every angle. I mean, even like my sister-in-law one time gave me a little card with a little jewelry type angel on it that was supposed to be watching over me. I don't want to, of course, insult her for her gift, but I would like to know myself, to have a right doctrine of angels and be able, even in little bits, to talk to other people about it.
Yeah.
Gloria.
Maybe
Gloria.
study.
Okay. Same thing. My mother, she professes to be a Christian, but she sends us this little, 5-inch figurine of an angel with wings on it. It looks very Catholic. It's, well, thank you for the gift, but Sister Carol, married to the late Terry McLean, evidently she had found some paper angels and she was cutting the wings off them, because angels don't have wings. But you try to be polite and you say thank you, but you don't hammer them for it.
Yeah, you don't hammer them for it, but even just being so washed in our culture, we, without even realizing it, I think, develop those thoughts in a way
Right.
if we're not well grounded in what the doctrine of angels is, and I'm not.
Yeah.
So I know something's wrong, but I don't know exactly how to
Right.
verbalize that to them or myself even sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Government's my guardian angel. They're always watching me.
But yeah, angels pretty much. It's not everything in a. Just to give a brief summary, you've got angels, you've got cherubim, you've got seraphim, and you've got those the angels. They're all men. They don't have wings, no halos. Baal worship, the worship of a false god. The angels of Baal had wings with halos, and they weren't women with long hair. None of that at all. They were all men in the Bible. They were, and you see them as early as Genesis. You see them. All the way in Revelation, but you also have cherubim, you also have seraphim, you see things like that in the Bible.
So they're different from angels.
Yeah, different classes. Yeah.
But they're not. They're all angels, different classes.
Well, no, actually, so
I just want to make sure I understand.
you have cherubim, and you have seraphim, and then you have angels.
Okay.
So you've got different things that are in heaven flying around, you can call it. So cherubim, seraphim. But they're not all, they're not all. Yeah. So you've got those, and they all serve different purposes. You see the different purposes. Some of them are on the throne, not as God, but they're there. Like you have Lucifer. Lucifer had his throne, and he was kicked out. He was a cherub, and he was a cherubim. He was kicked out, and but he had a throne. He talks about how he had his throne, and there's a throne, dominions, principalities, and powers that will one day inherit. All these things we're diving deep into now, just simply talking that the world's never even had a chance to look into. But yeah, you've got that. You've got other things that you read about in Genesis with Sodom and Gomorrah. You read about these things, how one angel's taken out thousands of Philistines during King David's time. They excel in strength. Angels food and manna.
So getting back essentially to was it Loretta who was?
No, that was Gloria.
Gloria, sorry. Gloria was saying about not being able to answer a thing like your mother was talking about, as far as how would you answer somebody who says, well, you must have had a guardian angel. There should be a way to answer that. I mean,
Well, yeah, you don't have to stay on the same topic. If they say you must have had a guardian angel, you could say, well, I'm so glad I'm saved. You can even keep the topic going.
That's it.
Yeah, I think I like that better, because I know you don't have to worry about circumstances, but on the other hand, if you don't speak with grace and charity, they're just going to walk away from you and shut that door even tighter than it was before you started.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to keep those doors open. I like the idea of changing the subject or getting into something I'd like to find a way to respond that would intrigue them enough to ask me another question.
My wife has a relative who is saved because he had a vision.
Oops.
And yeah, we tried to talk about doctrine with him, and it was just like chasing your own tail. So it does no good. So you have to just establish the salvation first, and maybe just leave it there. Just say, hey, like James says, I don't know about that, but I do know.
Yep.
what makes people think that angels are
Hello.
part of being part of?
Not only that, I mean, it leads me to take it a step to say, if all the angels are men in the Bible, which they are, how did it ever get turned around that in our society, basically, outside of somebody like Archangel Michael and all that, why are they all women now?
That's cultural.
Or cherubic, like with
Yeah.
babies. And
Mhm.
Just cultural. They've taken different cultures, different pagan beliefs, and they've mixed it in, just like Roman Catholicism. They've taken pagan beliefs, pagan practices, and just like with Christmas, none of it is biblical, and they've mixed it in. They've turned it into, they've Christianized pagan beliefs.
Yeah, because I've even thought the angel that announced to Mary that she was with child, that,
Wings.
well, was a woman, speaking women to woman.
Yeah. No.
It was Gabriel. I mean, Gabriel was a woman. Right?
Wow,
Yeah.
that's true.
So
I think for me, at this point in my life, with 4 grandchildren coming up, and deaths that we've had to experience in the last few years, I would like to know how to explain angels to them in a godly manner, in a godly way. And I guess I don't know myself. Do you know of any sermons or teachings?
if I don't find anything in the computer, I can make one. We can
Yeah,
make.
it would be good for me to know that, because I am trying to work on speaking with them. I did order the books from the coloring book, whatever those are, from Terry's collection for them. And so I would like to start going over those truths with them. But angels is one thing they're going to run into a lot in their life. And I guess it'd be nice at this age to get them set straight.
Yeah, and that's
It's
not
true.
a bad thing.
It's
not a
very
bad
true.
thing.
Yeah, you got to start small.
Yeah,
you know.
that's true. That's a very good point.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, like you said, maybe doing a study would clear
Yeah.
up some of that stuff.
It's like you're saying, you know not of what you speak.
Well, and like you said, salvation and talking about our salvation is the first thing we want to get across. But there might be other teaching times in conversation where we can talk about angels.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I wish I was faster on my feet
Yeah.
so that I can think of something appropriate to say. I'm the kind of person that 10 minutes after we've walked away from the discussion, this light bulb goes off and it's stuck. Missed that one again.
Yeah.
Me
Yeah.
too.
Yeah, I think
Me
we all
too.
have been. Yeah. I have a question about one of the statements in the lesson, the outline.
Mhm.
Could you explain to me? I know sometimes I get overloaded and I can't. It's the let me see. It's the almost to the end when you're talking about Calvinists and the circumstance, the God of circumstance.
Mhm.
What is the sentence? They'll not be Bible students. However, if they are, it will be in the areas where the circumstances are changed. What? I need some more explanation. That one makes my head spin.
Yeah, it's most likely that they'll not be Bible students. They won't actually go into the Bible, believe what the Bible has to say as far as rightly dividing the word of truth, and then expand upon it to prophecy and mystery, time past, but now, and ages to come, to the point where it's actually believing the Bible literally according to what the Bible has to say. It won't be like that. It says, however, if they do engage in even opening the Bible to read it, it'll be in the areas where the circumstances are changed, and they're going to proof text. They're going to change the Bible to, they're going to change the circumstances to match with what they wanted to say. They're going to take a prophetic verse, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Leviticus, Revelation, and they're going to change the circumstances of what God was saying to Israel in order to match it up with whatever's going on in their life today. They'll take something out of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, Revelation, Genesis, and whatever the verse has to say, they're not going to study the verse or the book or the Bible in its actual literal context. They're going to take the verse and they're going to say, well, here's why God, which is, the Calvinistic God of circumstance, has given you a flat tire. Here's why God has given you the winning lottery ticket. It's because it says here in Isaiah that blah, 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 blah. Or
Okay, so using it out of context, in other
Yeah,
words.
yeah.
Okay.
And of course, I think the other thing too is, are they using the King James?
Yeah.
many times
Because
they're not even doing that.
yeah, because that also can skew
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
it.
Yep.
Okay. I wasn't understanding it, but basically they're taking out of context and
Yeah.
using it. Okay.
So,
I also have a question I have a neighbor man. Do we have time for this, or am I taking up too much time?
actually, well, let's make this the last question, and then I gotta pick up the wife again.
Okay. Well, I mean, I just want to make sure no one else has something more urgent they need to talk about.
Not that I know. I think we're okay. Yeah, let's make this the last question, and then we can even go into the chat room later on.
Okay.
But yeah.
Yes, I have a neighbor man that spent 11 days in the heart hospital for his heart, and we thought he was gone. And I was scared to death because I'd never talked to him about the gospel, because he got kind of tense when I would approach the subject.
Yeah.
Well, I said to the Lord, please, I've been praying, send someone with the gospel, and if he comes home, he's home, and he's walking around and he's doing great, even though we thought he would never live. I called him and I said, are you ready for eternity, Bob? And he said, yes, I am. Well, I tried to go a little deeper, but how do I make sure? I mean, because I said to him, are you sure you're trusting in the blood of Jesus and not your good works to get into heaven? And he says, yes, Gloria, I have been for a long time. What do I do now?
I think that was an amazing start. That was
Excellent.
yeah.
Yeah.
I think it was an amazing start. That was I'd say 90% of where you should be at now. I would just maybe read them the gospel verbatim from 1 Corinthians 15, 1-4, just to say cover your bases. You've done pretty much.
Okay.
You've done.
I wasn't sure what to do next, because
Well, like I said, only
would-
just repeat the gospel to them.
okay,
Yeah.
just keep.
And then if you want to do something, I don't know if you want to call this crooked or underhanded. Maybe read him another God. Read him the gospel of the kingdom. See if he trusts that, and see if he's telling you sort of what you want to hear, what he thinks you want to hear. Like, say, here's 1 Corinthians 15, 1-4. Here's the gospel, blah, blah. Read him Acts 2:38 and see if he trusts that. See, repent and be water baptized. And if he goes, oh, I trust that, then you go,
See, he's not a churchgoer. There's no indication other than what he said by mouth. So I don't know that he knows that much about baptism. I mean, I feel like there needs to be more discussion, but I would like to look him deep in the eyes and say, are you sure? But you don't want to offend them and turn them away.
yeah.
Okay. So maybe we can discuss that in the chat room if somebody has ideas.
Yeah. That would be my thought. My thought would be, I'd say you got up to an amazing start. You said, not by works. And he said, absolutely. I've been doing that for a long time. So by his own words, and, words aren't everything, but it does sound like he's on the right, he's off to a right start. I just think with the gospel, I said, saved by grace through faith. Are we still on the right track with that? And then ask him, what do you think about this? What do you think about the gospel? Romans 10:9, 2:38, Mark 16, and that might even be just to feel him out, see what he thinks. I don't think he'd be trying to trick you at any. It sounds like he's authentic with you. He's talking real to you. But just to make sure he's not believing everything that comes his way that's written in the Bible.
But he must have a serious outlook on it, having gone through what he went through.
It sounds like
anyway.
he's authentic.
Yeah, he did say he knew prayer was the only way he got through it. So, because I told him we were praying for him every morning.
Yeah, but Gene.
Oh, I was going to say, Gloria, that was very bold.
Yeah.
I was on the phone. I knew he couldn't hurt me.
No, that was very bold. I don't know if I could have been that forthright, but I'm hoping to get there.
Oh, well, thank you. That wasn't me,
I know.
Yeah.
I know.
Good point.
But you got past your fleshly hesitation and whatnot, so that's good.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Just
But
want to
I would
encourage you.
appreciate any thoughts that you might come up with that, could be my next conversation with him.
Yeah, we can definitely work on that. I myself have to get going, and
Okay.
any opportunity you have, we're moving over to Telegram. So if you want to, we sent the link in the chat room. We'll send it again. Slowly over the next 5-6 weeks, we'll try to move everything over there. We'll let Facebook Messenger be plan B. We'll let Telegram be plan A, but not for a couple weeks. We're just slowly going to get people moving over there to Telegram. Tonight, when the trick-or-treaters come over, put a gospel tract in their candy bag, whatever it is, and
With an ice cube.
an ice cube. Yeah.
Not anymore.
Yeah. And then and then we'll be back here on Wednesday, and we'll go from there. We'll keep going along. We'll have the chat room open on both Telegram for practice and Facebook Messenger for the way we've always done it, and we'll keep going. We'll keep going with everything.
It took me a minute, but I now understand the ice cube reference.
Now, kids used to have paper bags.
Yeah,
The
they
tree.
used to have paper bags.
Now they'll just have soggy candy.
Well, no, it dries out when it sits on your driveway overnight.
Yeah.
So, all right, we'll see everyone later.
All right, bye.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye bye.